Welcome to the debate. A massive armada is heading to Iran. It is moving quickly with great power, enthusiasm, and purpose. Those are the exact words of President Trump delivered via Truth Social just this morning. He followed that rather vivid imagery with a stark countdown warning that time is running out. We are, I think it's safe to say, standing at a precipice in the Middle East right now. Following the success of Operation Midnight Hammer last June, a U.S. carrier strike group has arrived in the region, and the question before us is really one of ultimate leverage.
It is indeed a precipice, but I worry we're misjudging the depth of the fall. I mean, while the White House projects enthusiasm and purpose, the ground reality in Iran is one of fracturing chaos. We aren't just looking at a military standoff on a chessboard. We are looking at a regime that is, for all intents and purposes, actively consuming itself.
Precisely. And essential question we have to tackle today is whether this armada and the explicit threat that a new attack will be far worse than the previous one is the necessary geopolitical checkmate to force a nuclear deal, or if it represents a dangerous escalation against a volatile actor.
I'm of the view that the peace through strength approach, which we saw validated with the destruction of Iran's nuclear capacity, is the only mechanism capable of securing a binding resolution.
And I come at it from a different way. I believe that applying maximum military pressure on a government that is currently engaging in what looks like systematic mass killing creates a fog of war where miscalculation becomes a probability, not a possibility. We need to question the strategic clarity of demanding a diplomatic deal while, simultaneously signaling an intent to decapitate the regime. Then let's look at the position on the table. The United States is, right now, operating from a posture of empirical success. We can't ignore the reality of last June. Operation Midnight Hammer wasn't just a strike. It was a decisive obliteration of 22 years of Iranian nuclear ambition. The intelligence was clear. They were a month away from a weapon. We waited, we watched, and when it became existential, the U.S. acted. And that action was justified, and it was effective. Now we have the arrival of the USS Abraham Lincoln. This isn't just a show of force. It is the center of gravity of the entire U.S. military effort in the theater.
It is certainly a significant asset. No one disputes the tonnage. But strength without a clear off-ramp is just provocation.
Oh, it is more than tonnage. It's a credible threat. The president has stated that he hopes they make a deal, but he's also made it clear that time is truly of the essence. The goal here is to force the Iranian foreign minister to pick up the phone and contact U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. The silence from Tehran suggests they're stalling, and in the world of nuclear proliferation, stalling is a luxury we simply cannot afford. The Armada provides the leverage that sanctions alone, they never could.
That is a compelling argument if we were dealing with a rational actor operating in a vacuum. But have you considered the environment into which this armada is sailing? The situation on the ground has fundamentally changed since June. We aren't just facing a hostile government, we are witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe. The reports coming out of Iran, confirmed by human rights groups, indicate over 6,000 confirmed dead. And let's be precise about the horror here. Potentially 17,000 more are unaccounted for. We are talking about 90 children dead.
The brutality of the regime is not in question here. In fact, it reinforces why they can't be trusted with advanced weaponry.
But the brutality dictates their decision-making process. That's my point. When a regime is in a survivalist panic, killing its own citizens in hospitals and morgues, standard deterrence theory, it just hits a wall. You describe the naval force as a beautiful armada, to quote the president, but that ignores the tactical reality. Iran isn't just looking at this ship with awe, they are actively hunting it. We know they have surveillance drones operating south of the Straits of Hormuz right now. They are looking for that carrier group not to admire it, but to feed GPS data to ballistic missiles. You're parking a high-value target next to a regime that feels it has nothing left to lose. That creates a hair-trigger environment, not a negotiating table.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the utility of that force. We need to dissect what this armada actually is, because the terminology matters. President Trump uses the term armada, which sounds almost archaic, but militarily we're talking about a carrier strike group, a CSG. The USS Abraham Lincoln is a Nimitz-class carrier. It is massive, but it does not sail alone.
It never does.
Exactly. It's surrounded by a flotilla of warships and submarines. As military strategic planner Mikey Kay has noted, these assets provide a layered air defense system. This isn't just a boat floating in the water, it is a moving fortress. This creates a zone of dominance. It's not just about offense, it's about establishing a sphere where Iranian aggression is neutralized before it can even launch. The argument that the carrier is vulnerable to Iranian drones is, well, technically true in a physics sense. Anything can be hit. But strategically, it's overstated. The U.S. knows the Iranians are watching. That is the point. The presence of the CSG is designed to demonstrate that any attempt to strike, any attempt to lash out, would result in an immediate and overwhelming response. It forces them to the table as the only rational survival option.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes the Iranians are reading the board the same way we are. You talk about a zone of dominance, but let's look at the countermoves. Iran isn't trying to match the U.S. Navy ship for ship. That would be suicide. They're engaging in asymmetric warfare. The goal of that long-range drone spotted south of Hormuz is to get intelligence that is accurate enough.
Define accurate enough in this context.
They don't need a perfect picture. They just need coordinates to feed into a saturation attack with ballistic missiles. If you fire 100 missiles, the Aegis system has to work 100 times. The Iranians only need to get lucky once.
Which the layered defense is designed to intercept. The fouling systems, the interceptors, the electronic warfare suites, they're there specifically for saturation attacks.
Designed to, yes, but no defense is perfect. By concentrating the center of gravity of the U.S. military effort in one location, you raise the stakes of an accidental engagement. If a drone gets too close, or if a missile is fired in a moment of panic by a Revolutionary Guard commander who thinks an invasion is started, the U.S. will have to respond to protect that asset. Suddenly, we aren't negotiating a nuclear deal, we are in a hot war. The Armada is being actively targeted. That doesn't feel like leverage to me, it feels like a provocation in a powder keg.
But that risk is inherent in any power projection. To withdraw or to show hesitation because of potential asymmetry is to invite the very aggression we seek to deter. If we back down because they have drones, we effectively cede the region. And this brings us to the strategic clarity of the mission. It's not just about parking a boat. It's about capability. We have to look at the Maduro precedent.
I was wondering when you would bring up Venezuela.
It is the relevant case study. The U.S. successfully executed a removal of Maduro in Venezuela. That was a proof of concept for U.S. intelligence and operational capabilities. We're seeing the same intelligence triad being applied to Iran. Mikey Kay broke this down. Human intelligence, like the assets the CIA had in Venezuela, imagery intelligence from drones, and ELINT or SIGILINT, signals intelligence.
Listening to the phone calls.
Precisely. Building a pattern of life. This analysis allows the U.S. to understand the movements of the Ayatollah or the location of specific ballistic missile sites with incredible precision. This gives the U.S. options. We aren't limited to a full-scale invasion. We can surgically target the leadership, or we can soften up their defenses to ensure they're no longer a threat to allies like Israel. This capability, the ability to reach out and touch the regime's core, is what validates the peace through strength doctrine. It signals that we don't need to destroy the country to stop the threat. We just need to remove the obstacle.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the Maduro precedent applies here, or that it helps us get a deal. In fact, I think it highlights a deep contradiction in the U.S. strategy. On one hand, you have President Trump on Truth Social saying, "I hope they make a deal," and urging them to contact Envoy Witoff. On the other hand, you have military planners openly discussing the lifting of the Ayatollah planning his assassination, essentially.
It's about having all courses of action on the table.
But you can't simultaneously negotiate a stable, long-term nuclear treaty while openly planning the removal of the person you're negotiating with. I mean, that is mixed messaging at its worst. Why has there been no contact with Steve Witoff? Perhaps because the Iranian Foreign Ministry looks at the USS Abraham Lincoln, hears the talk of lifting the supreme leader, and concludes that the U.S. isn't interested in a deal at all, but in regime change. This duality, deal versus removal, it likely freezes diplomatic channels. It confirms their paranoia.
Or it confirms their reality, that their time is running out. That is the president's exact phrasing. Time is truly of the essence. The threat of removal is the stick that makes the carrot of a deal appealing. If the Ayatollah values his survival, he negotiates. If he values his nuclear ambition more than his life, then the lifting becomes the necessary solution. We have to be willing to follow through, or the threat is empty.
And that brings us back to the internal dynamics. You're assuming the Ayatollah is sitting comfortably weighing these options like a CEO weighing a merger. But the regime is currently distracted and perhaps blinded by its own war against its people. They aren't looking at the horizon, they are looking at the streets.
Which is why the U.S. should exploit this moment. The internal crackdown is a sign of profound weakness. The regime is fracturing. They are vulnerable. History teaches us that when a totalitarian regime faces internal dissent and external pressure simultaneously, it either collapses or capitulates. We saw the internet blackout. We know they're trying to hide the scale of the unrest. This is not a position of strength for Tehran.
It's a position of desperation. And desperate actors are dangerous. I want to focus on what you call weakness, which I see as a descent in the madness. We are witnessing a bloodbath on the ground. This isn't just riot control. Witnesses are describing security forces firing live ammunition from rooftops. They are raiding hospitals.
It's horrific, I agree. But does that not make the moral case for neutralizing their external threat even stronger?
It illustrates why the rational actor model fails. Look at the evidence of systematic mass killing. Human rights groups have found bodies in morgues that still have medical equipment attached to them. IV lines, bandages, but they have bullet holes in their foreheads.
That implies execution of the wounded.
It implies a regime that has lost all moral and tactical moorings. They are arresting doctors for treating the wounded. We heard about the surgeon who's beaten in his home. We heard about the young woman treated by volunteer medics because going to a hospital meant arrest or death. And then there's the case of Baby Ryder, the 19-year-old influencer.
The bike accident claim?
The regime claims it was a bike accident. Her friends say she was shot. They are killing 19-year-old influencers and framing it as traffic accidents. A government willing to execute the wounded in hospital beds is unlikely to look at an aircraft carrier and think, we should really sign a protocol with Steve Widoff. They are more likely to lash out unpredictably. They're in a survivalist bunker mentality. Pushing them harder right now doesn't guarantee a deal. It risks igniting a regional war, because they may feel they're already dead men walking.
That's a compelling argument, though. I would frame it differently. The irrationality you describe is exactly why they cannot be allowed to possess even the components of a nuclear weapon or the ballistic missiles to deliver them. You described a regime that kills its own children. Can we trust such a regime with the timeline to rebuild its nuclear capacity?
They were a month away, you said.
They were, and Operation Midnight Hammer stopped that. But the knowledge remains. The desire remains. If they're willing to shoot women in the streets, what would they be willing to do to Tel Aviv or Riyadh if they felt cornered? The armada and the threat of an attack far worse than the last one is the ultimate guarantee of security. It tells the regime, you may be killing your own people, but you will not acquire the means to kill millions outside your borders. We have the moral and military upper hand here. The destruction of 22 years of nuclear work was right. The follow-through is essential.
But follow-through in this context looks like war, and not just a clean air war, but a conflict that drags the entire region down.
It looks like containment. The U.S. successfully lifted Maduro. The capabilities are there. The intelligence triad, human imagery signals, is active. We are watching their pattern of life. We know where they are. This isn't 2003. This is precision coercion. The internet blackout tries to hide the killing, but it doesn't hide the regime from the NRO or the CIA. We are watching every move they make.
We can see them, yes, but can we understand them? That is my worry. We are looking at satellite feeds and listening to phone intercepts, but are we grasping the psychology of a theocracy that is drowning in its own citizens' blood? The president says he hopes for a deal. I hope for one too. But when you sail a warship toward a country in the midst of a massacre, you have to be prepared for the fact that the other side might not want to talk. They might want to burn the house down.
Then we must be the fire brigade that prevents the fire from spreading. The alternative, waiting, hoping they stabilize, hoping they become rational, is a dereliction of duty. As Trump said, time is running out. We cannot allow a rogue state, particularly one this brutal, to run out the clock.
And I worry that by forcing the clock, we're accelerating the collision.
To summarize, the United States stands at a pivotal moment. The strategy is clear. Peace through strength. Operation Midnight Hammer proved we have the will to strike. The USS Abraham Lincoln proves we have the capacity to dominate. The regime in Tehran is fracturing, yes, but that vulnerability is the opening we need to secure a binding agreement that ensures the nuclear threat is permanently neutralized. The next attack will be far worse is not a bluster. It is a promise that security will be maintained, by force if necessary.
And to summarize my perspective, while the military capability of the carrier strike group is undeniable, the strategy seems to ignore the human and political reality on the ground. We are floating a beautiful armada toward a nation where young women are shot in the streets and doctors are beaten for doing their jobs. The regime is desperate, irrational, and actively targeting U.S. assets. True security requires understanding that internal chaos makes external coercion incredibly risky. We aren't just measuring blast radiuses here. We are navigating a humanitarian nightmare.
We can agree at least that with the carrier group in place and the internet blackout still obscuring the full scale of the tragedy, the next few days are critical for the stability of the entire region.
Absolutely. The pieces are on the board and the margin for error has never been thinner.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.